Hello friends, I think today we are together to discuss about something which is very interesting, but majority of the people do not have awareness about this particular subject, and that subject is Factories Act of 1948. Maybe when we listen to Factories Act of 1948, only law students or people who are interested in law will be knowing much about what exactly Factories Act deals with or what exactly is the objectives of this particular Factories Act will be. But today in general we will come to know what are the objectives, what are the provisions, why exactly Factories Act is required, and what are the measures which are undertaken by the Factories Act in order to improve lots of things which are involved in a factory. So going through the contents, what we are going to discuss today is what is all about Factories Act of 1948, what are its objectives, what are its main provisions, why the factory has to be registered or why it has to get an approval or a license, and what are the health and safety as well as welfare measures which are undertaken under the Factories Act of 1948. So coming to what is this Factories Act all about? Okay, today we are going to understand in a simpler manner what is Factories Act of 1948. So this act is a consolidated act, and this act actually proposes to amend various working conditions in a factory, work conditions as well as the safety, health and welfare measures which are required by the workers of a factories. So what exactly this particular Factories Act deals with? Number one, it deals with the working conditions of the workers who are employed in any factory which is covered under the Act, Factories Act of 1948. And what does it actually focus upon? What does Factories Act actually focus upon? It focuses on protecting the workers who are employed in the factory against the hazardous or occupational diseases or industrial disasters which occur unintentionally. So that is the reason why Factories Act is very, very important, and to know about the implications of this particular act. So this particular act covers the entire India, or it extends to whole of India including Jammu and Kashmir. Why we are stressing upon Jammu and Kashmir is few of the laws, that is labor legislation, which are enacted in India does not apply to Jammu and Kashmir, but this particular Factories Act of 1948 is applicable to whole of India. So moving on next to the objectives. So what is the objective of this particular Factories Act? So this is a social legislation which aims at enhancing safety, health and welfare measures for the workers who are employed in the factories. And what is the next objective? What exactly it promotes? It provides protection to workers from being exploited by the greedy business establishments, and also provides hygienic working conditions, which is very, very essential in a working condition. And next, moving on to the next objective of Factories Act, it protects the employees, it protects the workers who are engaged in hazardous process in a factory under industrial disaster or occupational hazards, who are exposed to occupational hazards. It makes provisions regarding employment of women and young persons who are not eligible to be employed in a factory, and it also levies certain penalties for violation of this particular act, either by employers or workers who are being employed in a factory. So these are some of the objectives of our Factories Act. The next, moving on to the provisions. What are the provisions which are being made under this particular Factories Act? The first and foremost provision is the compulsory registration, licensing and approval of factories, which is very, very essential in order to set up a particular factory, which is covered under the definition of factory under this particular act. The next one is safety measures, health measures, welfare measures, working hours, employment of women and young person, annual leave provisions, accidents and occupational diseases, hazardous process and operations, obligation and rights of employers and employees. These are some of the main provisions which are being facilitated under this particular Factories Act of 1948. The next one is going on or moving on to the next topic is approval, license and registration. The first and foremost thing which a person or an occupier or a owner or a person who wants to start a factory, he has to submit the plans of factories to the chief inspector of factories or state government, through which the plan has to be approved by the proper authority. Then only he can start constructing a particular factory or extend a factory, which is very, very essential to start a manufacturing process. The next one is filling and filing the applications relating to the nature of plans, specification, which are very much essential and which has to be certified by the authority with proper approval, without which the factories cannot process further. And the next one is payment of registration fees, license fees and also renewal fees, which is very, very essential. And once the registration process is complete, the factory can start working with respect to the manufacturing processes concerned. And one very most important approval which is required by any factory is obtaining a no objection certificate from various authorities, especially by the Pollution Control Board. Pollution being a very major effluent which is affecting our environment in a large level, every factory needs to take up certain initiative in order to eliminate or reduce the pollution which is being occurred due to the process or manufacturing process which is carried on by the factories. So this is about the approval, license and registration of factories. Moving on, the health measures, the safety measures and the welfare measures which are being taken up by the factories. So coming to the first measure, that is health measure. Why Factories Act will emphasize more on health measure? What are the health measures which has to be fulfilled by any factory in order to carry on its particular process? The first thing is health measure. Under that, cleanliness, disposal of waste and effluents in a proper way, proper ventilation and temperature control techniques which has to be adopted by the factories, dust and fume which has to be controlled by the factories by proper application, artificial humidification if it is required, then proper facilities in order to control artificial humidification, avoid overcrowding. Yes, this is what happens in a factory. So if there are 10 or more workers in a factory, then the factory space, if it is sufficient only for the 10 person, then it is fine. So these are some of the health measures which a factory has to equip itself and implement these measures in order to provide proper facilities, health measures and other facilities, which is very, very essential. Yes guys, we will continue the next session in the next thing.